Hey guys! Recently I published a video about several instances where tournament Scrabble players challenged everyday words. Now, it was a really popular video, and I think a lot of you guys really got a kick out of hearing stories like when a grandmaster challenged the word honey because he mispronounced it as honey. That was me, by the way, in case you're wondering. So I figured I'd make a sequel to that video, and I hereby present to you more instances where Scrabble players challenged super common everyday words. So without further ado, let's jump right in. Our first word of the day is spelled R-E-S-T-I-N-G. Now, believe it or not, this one has actually come up multiple times in this context. So there have been several instances where a tournament Scrabble player unsuccessfully challenged this word and lost a turn. But in all of these cases, the reason for the challenge was the same. And what exactly was that reason? Well, each time this word was played, the opponent was like, re-sting? That doesn't make sense, because as far as I know, bees only have one stinger, which means they can only sting you one time. And if re-sting were a word, then it would mean to sting again, because whenever you add the re prefix to the beginning of a verb, it means to do that verb again. So once again, if a bee can only sting somebody once, then once it's already stung somebody, it can't re-sting them. So re-sting makes absolutely no sense as a word, and therefore it would make absolutely no sense for it to be in the Scrabble dictionary, and thus I'm going to challenge. Now, this word came back valid each time it was challenged because, you guys guessed it, it is not re-sting, it is resting. So I'm sure once the challengers realized what they had done, they were quite embarrassed, and as they were mulling over their mistake later in the day, they probably weren't resting too easy about it. Our next example is the 8-letter word spelled S-H-O-U-L-D-E-R. Now, this word was once unsuccessfully challenged by a player at a Scrabble tournament who, I presume, in addition to being a seasoned Scrabble player, was also a big fan of Shakespeare. And the reason I say that is because there is a quote from Shakespeare's play King Lear that goes, "Thou shouldest not have been old till thou hadst been wise." So presumably, after seeing this play, the player at first was like, okay, this actually makes sense. If I know shouldest is a word, then it presumably means the most should, because usually words ending in est are superlative adjectives, meaning the most of whatever the regular form of that adjective is. So if you can be the shouldest or the most should, it makes total sense that you can be shoulder or more should than somebody, the comparative form of should. So at first they were like, okay, this makes sense, and shoulder is definitely a word. But then they were like, wait a second here. That's actually not the context that Shakespeare used shouldest in. Shouldest in this sense is just an archaic form of should. So with that in mind, wait a minute, shoulder is actually starting to not sound like a word at all. Because if shouldest is a word, but it's not the superlative adjective I initially thought it was, but just another form for should, then shoulder makes no sense. Shoulder would be a comparative form of should, but should isn't an adjective, and you can't have a comparative form of something that's not an adjective in the first place. So actually, I take back what I said before. I don't think shoulder is a word at all, and I'm going to challenge. Well, unfortunately for the challenger, they should have stuck to their original instinct because, as it turns out, shoulder is a word. However, ironically, it's not a word for the reason they initially thought. It's a word because it's not pronounced shoulder, it's pronounced shoulder, as in your shoulder joint or a shoulder on the side of a highway where you might pull over if you're having car trouble. So a pretty ironic and funny sequence of events and faulty logic there. If the challenger had stuck to their initial logic, then they would have accepted the play, but for the completely wrong reason. However, they doubled down on their faulty logic and ended up challenging the play and losing a turn, so pretty wild stuff and a pretty unfortunate but hilarious mistake. Our third example of the video is yet another word ending in ER, this time the 6-letter word spelled M-O-T-H-E-R. And this word, once again, was unsuccessfully challenged at a Scrabble tournament by an opponent who was very confused, thinking, mothur? That doesn't make sense, because I know a moth is a type of insect. So either moth would have to be an adjective, and mothur would be a comparative form, meaning more moth, or moth would have to be a verb, and mothur would be a noun, meaning one who moths. But since, once again, I know what a moth is, and it's a noun, not an adjective or a verb, mothur makes absolutely no sense, and therefore I am going to challenge. Well, of course, you guys can guess why mothur came back valid, and I'm sure once the player realized, they were quite mortified, and they were very, very afraid that their mother was going to find out and be quite upset. Our next example is the shortest word we'll be encountering in today's video. It is a 5-letter word spelled U-S-I-N-G. Now, this one was actually submitted to me by one of my longtime subs, so major shout out to that sub on being willing to admit his mistake of unsuccessfully challenging this 5-letter word in order to give me some more great content for this video. Now, what happened here is my sub's opponent played this word, and he was like, Ussing? This really doesn't make sense, because I know us is a word, it's a plural pronoun used to refer collectively to a group of people, and I also know ing is a very common suffix that goes at the end of words, but ing goes at the end of verbs, not pronouns. It's used to turn a verb into a present participle, as in, I am challenging this word, which is exactly what my sub was doing once he processed all this and reasoned that ussing could not possibly be a valid word in the dictionary. However, much to his dismay, this word came back valid, and he pretty quickly realized his mistake, that he was using all of this logic incorrectly, and that this word was not ussing, it was actually using all along. We now move on to yet another example of a word that was unsuccessfully challenged by one of my subs. So as before, major shout out to this sub on being willing to admit this mistake in order to give me some more great content for this video. Here the word at hand is the 7-letter word spelled B-L-I-S-T-E-R. And after my sub's opponent played this word, my sub was like, huh, I know what a B-lister is. It's a celebrity who's slightly less famous than an A-lister, but as far as I understand, hyphenated words are not valid in Scrabble, so therefore I'm going to challenge. And it turns out that yes, B-lister would not be a valid word if it required a hyphen, however, it most certainly does not require a hyphen, as it's not pronounced B-lister, but it is pronounced blister, which is a common word meaning something painful that might develop on your skin. Just like I'm sure it was quite painful for my sub once they realized their mistake and this play came back acceptable and they lost a turn. Our final example of this video was once again sent to me by one of my subs, so as before, big thank you to my sub on submitting this example. Here, however, instead of unsuccessfully challenging the word, my sub actually played this word and it was his opponent who unsuccessfully challenged and lost a turn. The word my sub played was the 8-letter word spelled A-P-P-L-I-E-R-S. And after this was played, my sub's opponent got extremely hung up on this word having something to do with apples. And his opponent was thinking, Appliers? Applier might be a word, but if so, it would be a comparative adjective meaning more aptly or possibly more resembling an apple. And if that were the case, as an adjective, it most certainly wouldn't take an S. Because when you put an S on the word, it's usually pluralizing a noun or turning a verb into the present tense. You don't put S's on adjectives, that's just simply not how English works. And therefore, my sub's opponent decided to challenge this word. Now, of course, if you've made it this far in the video, you know that the challenge was unsuccessful and that the word is not actually appliers, but something else. In this case, the word is appliers, meaning ones who apply. Now, it is worth mentioning that my sub's opponent's thought process wasn't entirely faulty, because it does turn out that apply is actually a valid word in the adjectival sense, in addition to being valid in the verbal sense when it's pronounced apply. So apply, applier, and applyist, a superlative adjective meaning most resembling an apple, are indeed all valid words. However, of course, that still doesn't take away from the fact that applier only takes an S when it's pronounced applier in the nounal form. You still cannot put an S at the end of a word that's only valid in the adjectival sense. So still a pretty hilarious mistake by my sub's opponent, and a pretty funny one to end this video on. So that's it for this one, guys. Really hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks again to all my subs who submitted funny examples for this video. Really appreciate it. And if you have any more, please do submit them. I'd love to make another video on this. And if nothing else, I hope this video made you guys laugh and maybe feel better about some of the silly mistakes you've made over the Scrabble board, because as you can see, it truly does happen to the best of us. So thanks again for watching, guys. Really appreciate the support, and I will see you soon. Bye-bye.